Welcome to Hauler Talk. I am NASCAR's Mike Forde, joined as always by my co-host and good friend Amanda Ellis. Amanda, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Welcome back, Forde. A Tennessee native coming home with a victory this weekend always makes me happy.
How about that? I haven't had one of those since I think Regan Smith, a New York native, one from my home state, but shout out to Regan. And also, of course, joined remotely this time in sunny Florida, NASCAR.com, NBCSports.com writer Nate Ryan. Nate, how's Florida going?
It's going well. Visiting my mom this week and beautiful weather down here, so great to join you and Amanda on a lovely afternoon. And just learned that Amanda is from Tennessee. I was unaware of this.
Nate, how did you not know that? I'm such a proud Tennessean.
Well, speaking of sunny, we did have a very sunny day in Las Vegas. An even sunnier day for Josh Berry. Obviously, very popular win. Nate, I'd love to kick it over to you for this one. You have such a good historical mind and have covered the Wood brothers your entire career. Obviously, they're celebrating their 75th anniversary this season. Not that you have been around for all 75 years, but for as many years as you have been around, you've been covering the Wood brothers. What was it like to see Josh Berry win so early in the season? You know, you talk about the last 5 wins were all the driver's first win, and then you have guys like Harrison Burton and Trevor Bayne, both of which were at super speedways or restrictor plate tracks. I forget if Bayne, I guess, was still a restrictor plate at the time. So a little bit of a surprise, but this was no surprise. This was a pretty good beatdown by Josh Berry at the end there anyway.
Yeah, he really earned this one, Ford. It was not a matter of him backing into it by any means. That's not to say that recent Wood Brothers racing victories have come by happenstance that way, but I can remember that Elliott Sadler got his first victory in Cup with the Wood Brothers in 2001, and it was essentially because of a tire call that won him that race. And this was not that. This was Josh Berry, essentially just outdueling Daniel Suarez for that win. So it was very impressive. Certainly earned it. And, speaking to the history of the Wood brothers, like you said, Ford, I think there's a few takeaways. One is that, again, Josh Berry, another first-time winner for this team. And if you look at the recent roster of Wood brothers racing winners, it's Josh Berry, it's Harrison Burton, it's Ryan Blaney, it's Trevor Bayne, it's Elliott Sadler. You know, their last 5 wins have all been first-time wins for drivers. And so they've become, I think, this organization that has proved a great launching pad in the Cup Series. But yet we're talking about an organization in Wood Brothers Racing that's celebrating its 75th anniversary this year and has had some of the greatest drivers in history, not just NASCAR history. I mean, certainly they had a lot of big wins. The 1976 Daytona 500 probably being top of the list with David Pearson, Hall of Famer in NASCAR and one of the greats. But, AJ Foyt drove for this team, and Dan Gurney drove for this team. So, it feels like Mario Andretti should have driven for this team. Like every big name in racing, not just NASCAR, seems to have driven for this team and won with this team. And but yet, if you look at the last few decades, I mean, this is a team that, admittedly had fallen on some hard times and went into part-time competition for several seasons, and then got back on track, has an alliance now with Team Penske that they've had for about a decade, started running full-time several years ago, got that win with Ryan Blaney, and now have wins in consecutive seasons for, I think, the first time in at least 30 years. So you can just see on just so many levels, and Amanda can speak to Josh Berry and what that means for NASCAR, and how that shows that you can climb the ladder. You still can do that. You still can come from obscurity and come to the top level of NASCAR and climb that ladder and win. It's great on that level, but of course, all these myriad ways that I think there was a real celebration of the Wood Brothers racing history and tradition across the NASCAR industry, because they are so well respected and so popular among fans and the industry.
Well, I know, this is not exactly an opinion podcast. We try to give facts from the competition standpoint, explainer type top content. But I'd love your opinion on this question, Nate. You talk about the last 5. Elliott Sadler, kind of a surprise win at Bristol, like you said. Ryan Blaney, not so much of a surprise. Trevor Bayne and Harrison Burton, and now Josh Berry. Where does he's 34 years old, so he's no young buck. Where does his career go from here? as far as compared to the other 5. Are you seeing him as a Ryan Blaney future champion, or Elliott Sadler, in the playoffs every so often, or a Bain, Harrison Burton kind of one and done type deal?
I think that's the big question coming out of this, Ford, for the future of Josh Berry. And certainly if you take each of those other 4 instances, each of those drivers, I think, went on very divergent career paths. And, this is not to dismiss what happened to Trevor Bayne, but he won in his second Cup race ever. He wins the 2011 Daytona 500 with Wood Brothers Racing. And I think at the time, he was running a partial schedule, and there was all this talk about, like, is this a future superstar of the Cup Series? And it didn't work out that way. Obviously, it did not wash out that way for Trevor Bayne. And I think remains to be seen what happens with Josh Berry, but it's not exactly analogous to that situation in that he's full-time in the Cup Series now for the second season. He's been a winner in the Xfinity Series. And I think now the question kind of shifts to how can Wood Brothers Racing, can Ford kind of keep him? As there are some potential free agents on the horizon for next year. I'm not sure what Josh Berry's contract status is for next season, but I'm sure that's going to be some speculation here as the silly season kind of cranks up, as it always does annually, and you hear the rumblings about where drivers could be racing in the future. I think that's something that will come up with Josh Berry.
Interesting. Yeah, it was, and like you said, it was a popular win for sure. The post-race press conference, which I got to moderate, was about 40 minutes, and I got tired just standing there by the end of it. So, but it was questions after questions after question. It was very popular for all 4. We had the 2 owners, crew chief, and the driver up there. And so, wanted to give the fans a look at how we look at wins like this. And Amanda, leads a charge, helps lead a charge on the communications front on pushing this story. So, Amanda, I know you're hard at work, working the phone lines, working the emails, trying to get Josh more publicity. How's that going along?
Yeah, so anytime we have a first-time winner, we have something that's called, a real creative name here, first-time winner media plan, that we kind of essentially, put in play. And we, in the time that I've been at NASCAR, for almost 15 years here, we've had some form of that since I've been here, and it's taken some different variations depending on kind of where we are in the sport and who our partners are, but it's ultimately led by a team that is led by our coworker and teammate Jennifer Knoepel, and her team kind of works directly with the race teams to pull these plans together so that we have those in place for when a driver wins. So when Josh Berry captured that, checkered flag on Sunday, Jen sent the plan around, made sure everyone had access to it. We were able to very quickly identify pockets of time that he was available this week. Shout out to his team for help with that. And then once we have, kind of the time frames that are available, then it's up to our team to kind of go to work and work to fill what this week ended up being approximately 2 days, in the afternoons, available to be able to fill those with media interviews. So those can be national interviews. They can also be local interviews. Like the Tennessean is going to speak with Josh on Wednesday of this week. And then also, local to anywhere from the race market in which he captured the win in to also upcoming race markets as well. So kind of a wide variety of outreach that goes into play, but it's always fun when you get to work on a first-time winner, because typically that driver is like, sign me up for anything and everything that is on play. And I know we jokingly, Nate, when you were kind of talking about the drivers who've won for the Wood Brothers, Trevor Bayne's name came up, and this is always one of my favorite stories is obviously Trevor did win in his second Cup start in Daytona. And when you win the Daytona 500, that media tour, or that is an actual media tour, it looks a little different than just a win that might happen during the season. But when we had our relationship with ESPN, we would take drivers up to the ESPN headquarters, and you would do what's called a car wash. And that's where, at that time, ESPN had a lot of different shows, and that particular winner would go from show to show to show. And we just referenced it as a car wash. If you worked in the comms group, you were very familiar with what that was. For a brief amount of time, Trevor truly thought we were taking him to wash cars, that he had just won the Daytona 500,
That's awesome.
and he was going to go to a car wash of our choice up near the ESPN family's headquarters, and that he was going to wash cars. And that is what he was going to do after winning the Daytona 500. And thankfully, that's not what that is, and we did not make him wash cars, but that will forever be one of my favorite memories about drivers winning their first Cup race, and then the media media tours and media opportunities that follow that.
That's fantastic. Well, he's going to be on Marty and McGee this weekend, I believe, working through that a little bit. So maybe they can have him wash their cars while he's on that show. So a big weekend in Las Vegas Motor Speedway. It was 3 very different races, starting with the truck race on Friday night. And that's where we'll get started on our kind of nuts and bolts discussion as far as officiating goes and the competition side of the aisle. And the primary note and noteworthy nugget out of the Friday event was the 88 truck series penalty. So the penalty that happened to the 88 truck, and what it was is we caught them adjusting on their truck during a red flag period, which, throughout history, there's famous examples of that happening, and cars having to go to the rear or do a drive-through penalty depending on the flag status. So obviously the 88 truck got caught doing that. And then obviously if you watch the Fox broadcast, they played some audio from the crew chief disputing that. And then I was lucky enough to get the video from Chad Little, who's up in race control. And what Chad does in race control, and you've heard his name on this podcast before, he's also the driver approval head. And we'll talk a little bit about the driver approval process too later in the show, since that was also a hot topic this weekend. But he also manages the pit road officiating. So how the pit road officiating process works is we have a number of officials. I believe it's 8 in a trailer that's watching every single pit stop for every single National Series race. And when they see a violation, they send it up to race control, and Chad reviews each one and determines whether or not it is indeed a penalty. So it's kind of a little bit of a check and balance on that. So on this one, though, it obviously didn't happen on a pit stop. But what we did have is an eagle eye official down in the pit road officiating trailer noticed that someone went into the hood flap, reached in, and then did something in there. We don't know what it is. We also don't care what it was. And then pulled his hand out and then wiped the windshield immediately after. Well, even though it wasn't their pit stop, those pit road officiating cameras were still rolling. And so because of that, an eagle eye official noticed it, called it up, and we were able to call the penalty. And so I don't think the crew chief knew that we had this video. We did send him a photo of the infraction. And so looking at the photo, he probably just thought that this was not really enough evidence to draw a penalty. And I think his quote was, "This would not hold up in a court of law." But then the video came out, and sure enough, it was clear. He did the old stick the hand in the hood flap, pull it out, and then immediately wipe the windshield. I could almost hear like a Bugs Bunny, and then walked away. And then as soon as the official turned, he started doing the work. So it was pretty clear. So really, the long story short, there, the whole point of this is, even though inspection is your inspection period may be over, going through all the stations of inspection, or whether you're pitting or not pitting, if we see something, you can get a violation for it. And so the term that was always told me, inspection never ends. So you may be done with the OSS and headed to pit road, but that doesn't mean that someone can say, you know what, I need to look at something, and your car can be inspected. As if the garage is open, we can inspect you. So that's what happened with the 88 truck there. And we have cameras all over the place. We have eyes all over the place. Sometimes you hear a car get an infraction after inspection, and it could just be that they made an adjustment when the official's back was turned, but there was another official looking at the car behind you, and was able to catch it. And we've disallowed qualifying times for that. We've sent cars to the rear for that. So that's kind of how that inspection process works, especially in that 88 situation. Even though they were not in their pit box, they were near a pit box and were caught by the pit road officiating camera. And just by happenstance, our guest today is the lead technical director for the NASCAR Cup Series, and that is Brian Goble, and he is going to take us through the inspection process, station by station, hopefully help fans get a closer look of exactly the scrutiny that goes into each NASCAR Cup Series car before, after, and after when we bring cars home to the R&D Center throughout a race weekend. So that was the Truck Series, and I think that everything else was pretty clean. There was the rain kind of caught us twice, a very light rain, but just enough to be annoying and troublesome. But we did have a great race, and Corey Heim won another one. So speaking of big futures, Corey Heim seems like the real deal. Looking forward to his ascent up the NASCAR ladder.
Forde, can I ask one question about the 88 penalty?
Absolutely.
As it relates to inspections. Last week we discussed how when you guys find a violation at the R&D Center, you call the team or the crew chief, whoever, and you give them a chance to establish, make their case for plausible deniability about like why this might have happened. You might not always accept that, but they get to make that case. And it was interesting that you just said, when you see this on video, it's like, we don't care what the explanation is, it's a penalty. What's the difference there? Like, why is the team given a chance, or why is the team not allowed to kind of make their case for, well, what you saw on video wasn't what you saw. That Bugs Bunny theme music actually wasn't playing as we were doing that little thing to the hood flap.
Yeah, it's just so great question. That they are given a chance, and I believe they were given a little bit of a chance here. I honestly don't know exactly the cadence of penalty, dispute, or violation, dispute, penalty, more dispute. But one example, for instance, I believe, so 2020 was a pretty famous example, but we called at Martinsville. If you remember, Chase Elliott had a penalty that was rescinded, that eventually got him, because the penalty was rescinded correctly, he went on to the championship 4 and then ultimately the championship. So what happened there is we did hand him the penalty. I think we announced it over race control radio, and Alan Gustafson IM'd up. So we have an IM system through Microsoft Teams, or may have communicated through the official who communicated back up to us, but in some way communicated back up to race control and said, no, please look at that again. He reestablished himself, which is the rule. And so that, I think it was the Jackman, did reestablish himself and then pit the car. So we did review it and realized that Alan was right, and then we rescinded the penalty. In this case, what could have happened, I don't know if it did happen in this particular case. We could have rescinded it. We could have, the crew chief could have said, listen, that's not what happened. This is what happened. And that's why we send photos. We send it usually through the Microsoft Teams application of, no, here's what we saw. Here's a photo proof that he was digging around in there. Again, we don't know what he was doing, and we have assumptions, but whatever he was doing, there was an adjustment in our eyes that necessitated a penalty. So yes, there can be a quick discussion. The difference between that happening at the track and that happening in R&D Center is really just time. There is no timeouts. There's no review process really that we can take, a 20-second or 2-minute timeout, and sometimes the NFL timeouts go 2 to 5 minutes. There's no such thing except in NASCAR. We got to be much quicker, because then we'll start burning laps.
Yeah, and I also think one kind of comparison or clarification there is, most of the time what we're navigating at the R&D Center is a part. So there's a little bit of there's something to truly... Yeah,
sport versus technical.
Sport versus technical is most likely where that comes into play too. Because if they're going through tech, and we can talk to Brian about this, or ask Brian this when he obviously, is a little bit later in the podcast, but is also when they are going through tech in advance of a race, a lot of times they will have a chance to fix something, have a chance to There are times they will not have a chance, but there are times where they will have a chance to repair or fix an issue and be given that opportunity to go through tech again. So we can share with fans kind of what the process is on that, and he can help us all understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That was sort of the reason I was asking if there was a difference there, because in some ways they're comparable, but in a lot of ways they're not. And it's kind of more of a he said, she said, less black and white sort of thing with a guy fiddling under a hood versus, hey, here's this part that's we think's modified a certain way. What's your explanation for why or why not? They're comparable, but not. So I appreciate those explanations.
Yeah, like I said, I think last week or the week before, we are, when we call a penalty, whether it's a 50-point penalty or 100-point penalty on a R&D center teardown or post-race inspection type deal, or a penalty within the race, we feel pretty damn sure that that is the correct penalty. And now, sometimes people probably would say, well, that's why it takes so long to come up with these penalties, which I think is fair. And I think the folks up in race control are cognizant of that and trying very hard to make quick decisions. They want to get it right for sure, but more decisions being made in race control. And that was something that Elton Sawyer and John Probst, the two leaders of the competition team at NASCAR, talked about in the preseason. Is that something that when we see something that was pretty blatant, we're not going to need to have a couple days to talk about it. Really referencing, I think, what we saw at Martinsville with the 24 and the 3, and then the 23 as well. So those are types of infractions that you'll see in race control being made a lot quicker than they have in past years. Luckily, we haven't really encountered that yet in 2025, but it's going to happen because it's NASCAR, and that happens.
Well, one big topic coming out of Las Vegas certainly was what happened in the pits with the driver who is trying to win his 4th race in a row. Christopher Bell leaves his stall and has this situation where his team realizes immediately that apparently his left front wheel is not secure. So his crew chief, Adam Stevens, directs Bell, hey, go stop in Chase Briscoe, your Joe Gibbs Racing teammate's pit box, and Briscoe's crew will tighten the wheel for you. And to everybody's just surprise, befuddlement, whatever word you want to use, because I can't recall this ever happening in the 30-something years I've been paying attention to NASCAR. I'm not sure it's ever happened in 75 years of NASCAR, period. Briscoe's team secures the wheel for its teammate, but another team, Christopher Bell's car, and Bell goes out on the track and all good. And I'll ask you, Forde and Amanda, has this always been allowed? I think is the first question maybe coming out of this. I mean, can any team theoretically help another team when they want to have a car serviced and they direct their driver to pull into another stall? And I want to also just say, obviously there's a penalty involved here because it still is counted as pitting outside the box. Obviously we're setting a record here for how far you're getting service outside your box.
Yes.
In this instance. So that's part of it. So there is a penalty involved, but I think a lot of people were surprised that NASCAR would deem this as quasi-legal beyond having to serve the penalty for service outside the box.
Yeah, so as far as has this always been a rule, has this always been okay? Honestly, I don't know, from the early days of NASCAR and pit stops, and it's funny that the Wood brothers are credited for creating the current pit stop rules or choreography, and they won the race. But so I don't know how long this is, but as far as I know, it has never been policed. And I think a lot of this has to do with the advent of the next gen car and the single lug nut. And it's kind of an evolution of the tire coming off the car rules. So we talked about it last week. It started with I think 4-race suspension to 2 crew members, usually going to be the jackman and the tire changer, and then the crew chief. And we felt that was too harsh a rule, plus not harsh enough as far as an in-race penalty. So then we moved to the 2, 2, and 2. So a 2-lap penalty and a 2-race suspension to 2 crew members. And in our view, a tire coming off the car off of pit road especially. Being on pit road is not that great either, but being off pit road is a very dangerous situation. If you think, I mean, my stomach drops just talking about it and thinking about it, how bad that could be. If a 3,500-pound car hits a tire that weighs, I don't know how much it weighs off the top of my head, but as much as it does, flies over a catch fence into the crowd, God forbid, I don't even want to think about it. So that's something we take very seriously. So I think that's where the allowance, the acceptance of what the 20 did, and really the applauding of what the 20 team did, where that comes in. Because if what they did was avoid that dangerous situation by doing what they did, we're okay with it to a certain point. They did get the penalty, as you said. So they had to drop to the tail on the restart. So that is a penalty. We're okay with it to a point. But as far as a stiffer penalty, not right now, but maybe in the future.
So it is something you guys are looking at perhaps limiting. And is part of that, I mean, is there fear now that other teams will look at what Christopher Bell's team did and said, hey, that's now an option for us? And so you could have a situation where if a team has its car leave with a loose wheel and they're told, oh, no, wait, just go stop in a teammate's stall and get it fixed before you go by on track. You'll have guys weaving around, darting through traffic, trying to come in and out of the pits. Is that a possible concern here?
The concern is the unpredictable, the unintended consequences of this. And I don't really think it's as much as the loose tire and tightening that up. I think we're going to always be okay with that. And this is kind of reading between the lines of kind of what was said in some competition meetings this morning. But, keeping the tire on the car is very important. But you look at the 20 has three other teammates. What happens if this is the 41? And I guess you can go into a Forde box and then hope that, the manufacturer partnerships that they have come true and they help them out. But who knows? More so, I think it comes down to, the 20 leaves the box, the wheels are all fine, but the gas man didn't do his job and didn't pack it full of fuel. And is he going to now be allowed to stop in the 19's pit box and top off? That's a little bit different in our opinion, at least today. Or it might not be. But that is kind of the discussion we're having now is there more things we need to look at a little bit deeper to say, all right, this is not really in the spirit of the rule. Safety is one thing, a competitive advantage is another one. So that's really a conversation that we'll continue to have. But going into this weekend at Homestead, no changes to the rule, but somewhere down the future, potentially.
And then I just have two more quick follow-ups just in terms of like rules, procedures here, because again, I think this caught a lot of people off guard. And I understand your point that it's somewhat next gen related. It's somewhat that like the loose wheel phenomenon that you've had with this new car since 2022. But the rules on loose wheels changed around 2016, if I remember correctly, because you guys originally weren't enforcing lug nuts, and then there was a rash of loose wheels, and then you created the rules of right. The wheel comes off. To your point, Forde, we don't want wheels going in the grandstands where the fans are. We don't want to put them in danger, put them at risk. Had this rash of loose wheels. Now we're going to change that. So it's essentially been in effect for almost 10 years. But again, this is sort of the first time we've seen it. So did teams approach NASCAR? Or do you know of any teams like asking about it? Was it discussed by NASCAR? Did NASCAR tell teams this was possible? Any insight on all of that?
My best guess is that, Adam Stevens did say they talked about it. I think that he meant internally. As far as I know, no one's come to us. Oh, for
sure. I think he meant.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I think he meant in a nice way.
By we, meaning JGR.
Yeah, we read the rules.
Right. So that's what I was just going to say.
An area that we could utilize.
Yeah. I don't believe anyone's come to us and actually asked that question. I think they've just had a deep reading of the rule book and understanding of it and realized this was something that wasn't in black and white and had I don't want to say exploited it, but had used that knowledge to their advantage. And I think bravo to the 20 team on that one.
Yeah, and I also think when you listen to the the radio communication. Like, one thing that was like really impressive was just, even though, in my opinion, like Adam Stevens is yelling like, get to another box, stop in a box, stop in a box, stop in a box. Like, there still was such calm leadership in that moment from them. And just Christopher's ability to interpret that and know what he needed to do before he got off pit road was really just, a testament to that team. Obviously they've, won 3 races this year. But it did remind me of another sports moment a little bit, where in 2024 in the Super Bowl between the Chiefs and the 49ers, there was that moment there where they went into overtime. They were reviewing the overtime rules on the field, and you see kind of this, conversation that it looks like it's maybe happening a little bit in Mahomes' head when he realizes, whatever the decision the 49ers made was going to give the Chiefs the ball there at the end. And you can kind of see where he knows that that's what they wanted, that they understood the rules and knew that that's what they hoped for. And later on, the 49ers admitted that they didn't quite understand the rule to that degree. And it kind of reminded me of that moment a little bit, where I think
that's a good point.
JGR
Yeah,
and Adam Stevens and their team just knew they had found that was probably going to be allowed, and they used it to their advantage.
One more point that I want to make on the rule for service outside the box, and Steve Letarte said this on the Inside the Race podcast, and I thought it was important to note. It used to be that service outside the box was a one-lap penalty. And that was changed with the advent of the pro system, right? Because the enforcement became much stricter in terms of with the cameras, where you guys can see now when a gas can is plugged in as a car is leaving the box, like on a splash and go, and it's barely over the line, you make that call. Whereas in the past, you might not have made that call. There was more dispensation allowed teams. Like, you're able to kind of do more enforcement. And so the penalty was changed for service outside the box from one lap penalty a few years ago to tail end or drive through, depending on if it's yellow or green. Is that correct? And can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? That certainly changes the calculus, I think, on if teams would take this risk of sending a car to another box because the penalty isn't as harsh.
Yeah, I don't think it actually had anything to do with the pit road officiating and the accuracy of that. And I believe that rule changed more recently than a few years ago. I want to say it was at the beginning of last year.
Oh, really? Okay.
I believe, if it's only a year and a half old, from my understanding. And the reason was more so we looked at, as we do in the off season for every rule that we have, or maybe not every rule, but many rules that we have, especially when it comes to pit road. And is it right? Does it feel like the right penalty for the crime? And this one, we didn't feel that way. So pitting outside the box, if you're 6 inches over the line, a one lap penalty for that felt harsh to us. It felt like the punishment didn't fit the crime. So we moved it to a flag status penalty, whether that's to the rear or a drive-through penalty. And that's part of something I brought up earlier to somebody yesterday on this topic of if we change the rule to, say, a 1 lap penalty or more, 2 lap penalty, whatever you want, for pitting someone else's pit box, does that change, to your point, the calculus is in the crew chief's head of maybe we risk it? Is it really looser than we think? Those guys are so fundamentally sound; they probably know if a tire is going to come off or not. So probably not. They'll know full well with a high degree of certainty. So that's probably doesn't even make sense. But you wonder if the stricter the penalty, more of a gamble they'll take with the tires. So we'll see.
Always the unintended consequences that you're talking about. And one more thing I just thought of. There were 4 loose wheels in this race. And I think there have been a lot of speeding penalties over the last 2 races. Again, Letarte talked about this too and just kind of chalked it up to 2.5-mile tracks in a row, 4 tires all the time in Vegas. But does NASCAR look at having to do anything in terms of addressing that or talking to teams about why are you having so many loose wheels? Or is that just something that just sort of works itself out by itself and that teams are going to make mistakes like this early in the season, especially now that you have a good pit stop, like the Jackman sometimes is dropping it without even being able to check if the front's okay, and you're going to have that happen. Is that something NASCAR gets involved in, or is that just the teams kind of work it out?
We do. We get involved in it to a point, so we'll have a discussion with the teams. So right before this taping, actually, I had talked to Brandon Thomas, our vice president of vehicle design, and asked him a little bit about those wheels. And so we did get with the 8, the 5 last week or 2 weeks ago, and the 19. And was it a wheel weight problem? That was one of the issues that it seemed to be the 5 encountered 3 weeks ago. I forgot. I'm drawing a blank. Atlanta, I guess. Atlanta, yeah. So they had a wheel weight that got caught up in when they were putting the wheel onto the car. So that was an issue for them. Probably some bad luck there, but that they still would draw a penalty for that. 19, I think, was just a situation where the lug just never got on, and then the 8, I think it was a little bit of operator error on that. My New York accent just came out there a little bit. Operator error for the 8, not a significant one, but it wasn't an equipment malfunction or anything like that. So. To answer your question, if that answers your question,
it does
something we do talk to the team with, because if there is a problem with the pit gun, we'll go to Paoli and get that addressed. If there's a problem with the wheels, we'll go to the BBS and get that addressed. So that it's always something that we work hand in hand with the teams on.
Love hearing the explanation of the dulcet tones of New York as well. So thanks, Forde. And by the way, I just checked. I had a chance to look at it. It was Coda where Larson had the loose wheel.
Coda, that's right. So. Okay. All right, we're now joined by our guest this week, and he is the Director of Technical Inspection for the NASCAR Cup Series, and that is Brian Goble. Brian, welcome to Hauler Talk.
Thank you, Mike. Pleasure to be here today.
So Brian's job at the track is really, if you listen to last week's episode, we had Jason Burdett, and he was the Xfinity Series Director of Technical Inspection, and so Brian is the Cup Series version of that. So in short, tell us what your job is on a week-to-week basis in 30 seconds or less. 30 words or less. How about that?
30 words or less. Okay. Not a problem. My job is really to ensure that we achieve the parity that we set out with in a given weekend between all cars. First in points through last in points, so everybody has an equal opportunity to go out and compete every single weekend. And we do that by ensuring that they meet all the technical specifications and follow every single rule that we have to the best of our ability with the people we bring to the racetrack, time in, time out.
Perfect. So what we're hoping to do during this interview is, one, obviously get to know you, Brian, but take fans into the inspection. Have them have a personal tour of the inspection process, both pre-race, which I know is quite involved. Post-race is involved, but also different. And then obviously at the NASCAR R&D Center, when we have full-on teardown where you can walk in that center bay and see parts and pieces all over the place. So, but before you go to there, I want to talk about you. So if you want to give us your resume. So you have been in all kinds of forms of motorsports leading up to this job at NASCAR. So where have you been before NASCAR? Where have you been all our lives, Brian?
Where have I been, Mike? Well, as you and I discussed last night, my career has kind of spanned a myriad of different racing environments, starting with my early days, I guess I'll say, with the Indy Racing League. When that first started in 1997, I had the opportunity to get involved there as a young man right out of college, and took the opportunity and ran with it, and went through that, did the Indy 500 and various, open wheel circuits that we ran on. Took my career from there and advanced to, I like to say I was, Marlboro Team Penske, Penske Racing, certainly a big time organization, and involved with the, championship activities and efforts there. And then the connections I made while I was a young man in Detroit brought me back to Detroit a second time, because I had moved from Pennsylvania to Michigan, back to Pennsylvania, back to Michigan. That second time through Michigan was working directly with the General Motors guys, and that took me into a lengthy stint with the Corvette factory program, the GT1 sports car program, that had me going from every place you see in Detroit, in the United States, whether it's Sebring, whether it's Road Atlanta, places like that for the 12-hour, the 10-hour, all the way to the 24 hours of Le Mans. So me, a young kid out of, I like to say, nowhere, Pennsylvania, no traffic lights in my hometown, all the way to the 24 hours of Le Mans, and be able to compete on that stage. So that was pretty cool. That was keep that place fondly in my heart as a place I like to go to. So anyways, I, did that for a long stint, and then opportunity presented itself, oddly enough, through the NASCAR world. Friends of mine at General Motors worked at Richard Childress Racing, and he called me and said, hey, would you be willing to come down here and help us with our sports car program and help with our NASCAR program on the engine powertrain side? I said, yeah, sure. I'd certainly consider it. Came down here, had a conversation like that. Here I come to North Carolina. So spent 4 or 5 years doing that. During that time period, picked up the 24 Hours of Daytona win for GM during that time, birthed a new Cadillac DPI VR program that we were involved in. So it was really rewarding. I've been to a lot of places, had a lot of opportunities. The best thing I can say for anybody that, aspires to go into motorsports is pay attention to the people you get to work with, learn from them, but seize opportunities and put your effort into it. It can lead you to some great places.
So sports car, Brian, you brought up something that kind of was interesting to me in that they mentioned it earlier. Someone, maybe Kyle Busch, mentioned it during the Las Vegas weekend, talking about the driver approval process and how there's a pretty good translation between IMSA to now the next gen car. Do you find that that helps your job, your background in working in sports cars, whether that was the 24 Hours of Daytona or the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and now the next gen, which the platform was, I think there's at least cousins, maybe even sisters of the IMSA platform. Does that help you in your inspection job?
No, I think it does. The predominant powertrain programs I worked on were pushrod V8 engines, which obviously we have in NASCAR, and we continue to have in NASCAR thus far. So I have a lot of experience in that background. So that certainly ties in. IMSA cars, if you will, sports cars, ALMS cars that I've worked on in the past, those were independent rear suspension, which the next gen car is independent rear suspension. A lot of the technology and carbon fiber and things like that are in the next gen car were already present in IndyCar and present in sports cars. So it really, it's kind of an easy tie-in for me. It makes a lot of sense. Race cars with 4 wheels have 4 wheels. Steering wheel. They got a steering wheel. They function the same way, but they drive differently. Obviously, the downforce in a open wheel car, immensely higher. The downforce in a sports car, certainly immensely higher, because a lot of the aerodynamic features that are allowed to be put on the car that we don't want in this series. We've got a certain level of downforce that we set on these cars, and that's what we're going to maintain because we have a look that we want to achieve. We want to maintain some tie to the past of what a true stock car looks like. So it's important to us to have that. But yes, there are some definite ties in, Mike.
Brian, probably the number one question we get from fans, and which are hopefully listeners of the podcast, is when it comes to the tech process, there are times when the only vantage point that maybe fans have about the tech process is what comes from the teams. And though I think the teams do a really nice job, I mean, most weekends there's, it's kind of business as usual. But there are weekends and certain weekends, and sometimes we can predict what weekends those are going to be, where, you can tell there's some gaming going on in the garage, or teams have maybe gotten a little more brave in certain areas, but really just for their maybe the first step in explaining to them, just take us through kind of to start the basic process of tech, and then I'm sure we'll have a few follow-up questions as it relates to that as well.
Sure, not a problem. One of the things I mentioned to Mike last night, we were talking about this a little bit, me coming on here, I said, the whole process really, for the fans from the outside, it is a community, right? And Amanda, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The whole garage, NASCAR, we need each other to be successful so that the whole product we put on the track for the fans is what we want to achieve, right? We want to have this consistent performance out there where there's a lot of passing, and there's a lot of activity going on. And one of the ways we have to do that right from the get-go is making sure that there isn't a car that's completely out of the box. And the process is very consistent in achieving that. So in terms of the process itself, once we set a pattern, we don't change it. I think you and Mike both obviously are aware of this, right? We evaluate any change we're going to make in our process, and we vet it out before the season. Once we set that, we try not to change it. If we find that we have to change it, we will, but it's not without a lot of evaluation before we do so.
So, Brian, let's get into the inspection on a week-to-week basis, the specifics. So can you take us through step 1 through however many, how many stations are there? 7, 6?
Approximately, yes.
Yeah. So if you can take us through what all goes on, step 1, step 2, 3 through 6, and really get a feel and try to give the listener a feel of almost like they're walking with you. They're next to a car, start to finish.
Yeah, no problem, Mike. So I'll take it from the fan perspective. If I was a fan there watching, I'd want to know what's happening step by step. And it all starts with the cars coming off the haulers, off the lift gates, right? You'll see the teams moving all kind of in a choreographed, approach to things, because they have a certain amount of time they have to get it off the truck, put it in position in the garage stall, so that we then can go about doing our job.
That wasn't the case with the 6 team this weekend, though, right? There wasn't much choreography going on there.
Well,
did I hear correctly? I'm saying that because Amanda has a very close relative that's on the 6. Apparently, there were some problems there, and they broke the diffuser.
They did, but as I mentioned, and that is correct, I mentioned the community aspect of it, though, right? Certainly, they came to us and they said, look, we had an issue, right? We rolling off the truck, we drug it on something, and it broke. And we said, okay, we'll work with you because we need every single one of those cars in the show. We need everybody to have an equal opportunity. So we said, all right, let's go ahead and what do you want to do? And they said, we'd really like to change the diffuser. Go ahead and change the diffuser. Our assistant director said, hey, when I get to you, if you're not ready, I'll bypass you. I'll come back to you. We'll work with you. And that's exactly how it happened. So I'll have to learn who Amanda's family member is. So, make sure to keep eyes out on that one.
Yeah, it's her husband. Who you will have to eject one of these days, I'm sure.
Well, you never know. Maybe I'll have to ratchet things up then, I guess, a little bit. I didn't know that, Amanda. You didn't tell me that.
Well, I try not to tell too many people.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So where were we, Mike? Then go ahead.
So the car's off the lift gate, and now what happens?
Right. Cars get off the lift gate. So the first thing you're going to see is the cars, once they're in position in the garage stalls, we've moved now to a kind of a procedure where we do our chassis inspection in the garage stalls. And we've done that because there's a time efficiency factor that we evaluated and that made things move at a more steady rate. We're able to process cars faster. So the first thing that's going to happen is our engine and our safety officials will come physically to the car and begin their checks. They'll be going through doing that. Right behind them, the chassis folks, the chassis inspection officials, they'll be waiting to follow them right in line. And we'll move garage stall to garage stall in point order, which is always the way we do it, to process each car. While that's happening, the shocks, if you will, or the dampers, as some people might call them or refer to them as, those will go to a separate independent area where we've got an official waiting, and we've got all of our equipment set up, and we'll be checking the shocks for all the specifications that have to be monitored on those. So once those are approved, they meet all the requirements for lengths and all the different details that we require on those, they'll get a NASCAR seal attached to each one of them. They'll go back into a sealed case, and they'll stay with us. We obviously don't want them to walk away and have now this NASCAR approved set of shocks that they can go modify. So they'll stay with us, and they'll stay there until
Brian, they would never modify the shock.
No, of course not, Amanda. No. They would never do that. But they'll stay with us until that car passes complete through the inspection process. So I come back to engine and safety and chassis. They're being done in the garage stall. So if a fan's looking and saying, well, what's going on? That's what's happening in the garage stalls as they're moving along. Once a car is through those 3 steps.
So, for instance, the chassis, take for example, what are they looking for?
Well, everything is about the rule book, right? Obviously, we have a very comprehensive rule book. There's so many things in there that have to be adhered to. They're looking for anything and everything related to the suspension components, the configuration of those, the brake cooling components, the overall body fitment, the fitment of the underbody on the car, all the interior, the driver cooling systems. There's nothing on the car that we don't look at.
Yep.
We try to look at every single thing we can, but the other thing that I think I'll point out for the fans realize is we try to target about a 4-minute time average per car. So think about that. You have
for
a
the
race,
chassis station or the first 3?
Pretty much for every station.
Oh.
We've calculated it out, and it pretty much runs on that. But think about put yourself, Amanda, in that position where if you have to have 4 minutes to take the entire NASCAR rule book for the areas that matter for that particular station, but there's a lot going on, and you have to try to do your best to evaluate those cars. It's a skill.
Yeah.
It's certainly a skill, and it takes time, and it takes people who have done it a while and know exactly what they're looking for. But there's a relationship going on all the time, right? Husband obviously is going to tell you the same thing.
Yes.
We're working together because they will communicate with us and say, okay, well, this is why this is way. And we'll say, well, it can't be that way because it's outside the rules. Or we'll say, no, okay, this is where we need you to be and you're in a good position. But they might say, hey, we were a little bit different last week and, how do you want us to correct it? So it is a give and take, if you will, or at least a kind of a relationship that we work together, because we got to work together for 36, 37 weeks a year. It's a long time.
And then, so after safety, engine, chassis, what's next?
So once that car leaves typically the garage stall, and if you're at Bristol, you won't see garage stalls because there's no garages, obviously, at Bristol. They're behind the haulers. But most places there's garage stalls. They'll leave there, and then they will go to handheld templates and interior inspection. So it's exactly what it's described. We have an official there. She will apply various templates, and she will look at making sure everything fits, all the templates that she has at her disposal right there. It's roof rails and spoilers and back glass and side glass in the car, various things, grill screen inserts, everything. She'll look at all those things. When she's done with that, we've tasked her with, okay, look for the interior. Look for things that shouldn't be in there. So, Amanda, we might have to ask your husband, where do you have your water bag this week? And why is it there? Why is it in a different place than it was last week?
So that's kind of why we found the 51 and 34 in Daytona, right? The water,
Yeah, with unnecessary mass added to them, correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to make sure that our competitors come to us and say, look, I just don't want to get beat by it. But if I'm going to get beat by it, then my hand is forced. So we ask, they come to us and say, hey, we look at NASCAR officials to make sure that, well, you're keeping everything level, keeping that playing field level. And that's what we pride ourselves on every day, is when we go out there, we try our best not to miss something. And we try to trust our people that when they do their job, they're doing it very well because they do it on a repetition basis. And they're very, very, very into their jobs. So once that activity is completed and the car is ready to go, okay, where we're going to go next, we're going to go into the optical scanning stations and the underbody scanning stations. That's where we start to generate a lot of data, a lot of information on the cars.
When is weights? Is the weights before? Does it?
Well, it's combined together actually. So
it's all in the OSS now. Was it used to be two different ones?
Well, for the last handful of years since Next Gen, the underbody scanning, because the underbody of the car is largely, it's an upside down airplane wing, right? Now we're like an Indy car, or like a sports car, right? So the car itself has that underbody that really needs to be thoroughly and accurately scanned. But we also need to know how much the car weighs. So we've got a combined station. So when people see us roll this car up onto this first platform where they can see the car, because in the OSS you can't see it. It's all in that surrounded tent. I'll explain why later, but the car goes up on there. We're going to check the weights. We're going to check the body platform heights of the car. We're going to check the spoiler angle, because I like to say that's the closest we have to a surface plate that is at true 0, 0, X and Y 0, 0. So anybody understands the levels. That's the only place we've got. And we've got to do that 36 times a year. Think about that. We tear it down, set it up, tear it down, set it up. And anytime we move that, we have to find a way to make sure it's as level as possible. We've made investments in equipment to allow us to achieve that. And with that in mind, we can actually go and assure our teams that, hey, every week we come out here, it's as consistent as we can get it.
That's wild. That's super interesting. Appreciate that in-depth walkthrough of the inspection process. There's obviously so much that goes into it, and we talked about and how precise it is. Amanda was talking about a couple episodes ago how you see umbrellas walking through the inspection line, so that just the little deformities can really. And that's the box that these teams are working in and that you're trying to officiate in. It
is. The box, as you mentioned, it's purposely held to a tight standard because of the parity that we seek, Mike. Amanda, obviously you both know that it's a big topic, right? How close our races are, how much there is an opportunity for any and every competitor out there to have a shot at a win, which is what they're all out there for. So we feel like anytime we can go out there and we see qualifying times from top to bottom that are so razor thin close, we're doing our jobs in inspection. That's kind of our referendum on how are we doing, really is what it comes down to for us. So while they go across the underbody and we evaluate that thing very carefully, they'll take themselves, we'll send them over to our optical scanning station where we're going to generate more digital data. I forget what the guys told me, but it's multiple terabytes a weekend. Multiple, like where they're trying to figure out where we're going to store all this stuff going forward, because we're just generating more and more data. But when they go in that OSS station where people can't see the car, what's happening in there is they're scanning that whole exterior of the car, looking at the body surfaces. As you said, looking to make sure that they're within that very, very tight box. And while they're in there, because it's all done optically, we can check all the mechanical, if you will, settings of the suspension of the car, the caster, the camber, the toe, the wheelbase. We can check all those things, which are all very controlled in our rule book. And if the team is successful in getting through that entire process, hopefully Amanda's husband's team gets to there on a regular basis.
I love that this is a topic, by the way. This is giving me
I
endless
promise
joy.
you, my week goes much better when it is an easy pass on tech.
Gotcha. Well, he's a pretty nice guy, so I like John. But honestly, when they find themselves going through there and are able to meet all of our rules, we always say to them, look, we're going to do our part, you do your part, and we're going to try to make sure that there's parity out there so that when you guys go on track, you know that you have a fair shot to compete against the other guys, which is all they come and ask of us every week. So you mentioned, like, the consistency of it. That's why when I talk about setting up and tearing down this equipment, every week we have a very specific process we go through to set it up and a bunch of checks that we do to make sure it's consistent, because if we don't get it right, you probably hear about this, Amanda, they will let us know. Very quickly.
I'm sure.
They let us know.
Squeaky wheels always get the grease, right?
Well, they help us be better because they point things out and they seek that consistency that we also seek going into the season. But if something's awry, sometimes they let us know because they analyze their data immediately when it comes off the car, especially if they fail, right? Because then they're like, well, what happened? Why did we fail? How do we compare to our shops? Because they all have optical scanning stations at their shops. They all have the ability to, what they'll typically do is they'll basically do what's called blue light scanning of the underbodies of their cars. So they can understand how they set that car up, how close is it to the limit, and where are they trying to go with it when we get to the track. But you mentioned the umbrellas and things like that will affect the, if you will, the solar load going onto the cars. We'll show up at a track, and if it gets colder than what everybody expected, the car's going to go one way. It's going to shrink. Temperature has the same effect. And if it's hotter than everybody expected, it's going to grow. And when it grows or shrinks, they could step over the line very quickly because they don't stay in the middle of the line.
They're right up next to you.
They're always to one side or the other, and they might be both depending on what they're trying to do with the shape of the car. So it's really a good environment for anybody that comes out there and thinks it's adversarial. It's not adversarial at all. It really is a community of people that have to work together to put on this great product we have week in, week out. And we try to show that back to them by being consistent in what we do, being fair in what we do. We don't get upset. We just work with these guys and ladies that are out there because we've got a great group of people on our side, I think, and they have great groups of people in every one of these teams.
Do they get upset? Community. Does anyone get upset when you have to eject them? Do you do that, or is Jesse Delavote the assistant director?
So our assistant director, Jesse Delavote, Jesse gets the unfortunate task of walking people out. I don't think anybody gets upset. Sometimes guys are like, hey, thanks for the vacation this weekend. Or, I'm going to go fishing now, or I'm going to go ride my bike, or I'll just hang out, so it's fun. But no, honestly, for me, I always say to the guys, I really don't like to send anybody home, right? Over something silly. Sometimes there are things that they just made flat out human error mistakes, right? Well, we're all human. We make mistakes. And when it happens, it happens. They own up to it and they go, all right, well, we'll move on and we'll see you next week because they're going to see us again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it's worth noting that when you talk about having to inject people, like in most occasions, it probably is a little bit dependent on what happened or the infraction is. But in most occasions, if a car chief is ejected, like for example in Phoenix, and it's part of a championship winning team, once the race is over, if that particular team won, we'll work the best we can to get that particular crew member into the racetrack so that they can celebrate with their team, and we are not maybe as mean as some people might think we are. So NASCAR does try to, even though the injection of a crew member is part of it, if there is a special situation like that, we do try to use good judgment and still allow them to celebrate. And I think that happened. I was
going to say it, man.
With Logano.
Are you referring to 2024?
Yes. I wasn't going to say it, but since you brought it up, yes, that did happen.
That's worth talking about because the car chief, which is the assigned person when you fail. Now, unless you fail mechanical measurements, then the engineer goes home. So there are some differences. But in this case, it was a body failure on the car, and the young man who's the car chief, great guy, like all these car chiefs, they're very in tune in what's going on, and they bring their best. And it was tough to see him because, yeah, as you said, it's championship weekend, right? And you're asking this young man, he can't be at the racetrack. However, I think I texted him and said, hey, listen, you know what? You've done a great job with your guys. You've done a great job with your car. You had a mistake, and he owned it to him and said, yeah, I just went too far, pushed too hard, and I hate it for the guys. I hate it for everybody involved. But he said, I think the car is going to be the best it can be. And well, they go out there and they win the race, or they have to go out and win the championship, I should say. And like Amanda said, we made sure to get that young man back to the racetrack so he could involve himself in those post-race celebrations, which are so key.
Absolutely, yeah. I
think in my past, when I've been a part of winning races and things like that, when I was younger, I didn't put enough emphasis on it. It was like, oh, all right, I'm on to the next race, because you're only as good as your last race. You got to be better the next time out. And I probably didn't pay enough attention to that when I was younger. Now I realize it. So when somebody like that, obviously has to leave the racetrack, I try to make sure, like Amanda said, we collectively try to make sure that if there's a way to, make that happen and get him back involved, we're going to do that.
You always hear that, you never understand your success while it's happening. You take it for granted. And that's why we try to make this podcast the best it can be every single week.
Well, you guys do a great job on it. Like I said to you, I've listened to a few of them, and it's really entertaining. I like it.
Nate?
Brian, I've got a couple for you. When you brought up the optical scanning station and the terabytes of data that you're collecting, obviously that's kind of fascinating because for the first however many decades of NASCAR, there was no such technology. And the inspection process then were these huge, aluminum metal silhouettes that they would just fit to the cars to try to figure out if they were in compliance or not with the rule book. So I'm wondering, and Forde was kind enough to share kind of some of your notes on what your job is. And I noticed you said individual templates are part of this process. So I know a lot of this kind of predates your role involved in inspections, but I wonder if you can kind of contrast what things are like now when you have all this technology versus the way things were for the first, the optical scanning station's been around for about a decade. I mean, the first 60-something years of NASCAR when none of this was a part of inspecting cars. I'm sure it's a drastic kind of sea change in the way NASCAR does things here.
Yeah, it certainly is, I guess. That's a good segue for me, though. I'll say as a young kid, I grew up about an hour north of Pocono Raceway. So I was going to NASCAR races there. I was going to Watkins Glen when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, going with my family. And I saw, NASCAR then. Of course, it was blossoming and it was growing. And there weren't these inspection processes because there wasn't as much engineering, obviously, by far from what it is today, right? There's so many smart men and women working on these cars, working on the cars at the shop, working at the cars at the track. While the cars are at the track, there's people back here at these shops working. And so they've raised the level of analysis. They've raised the level of engineering expertise that's going into these cars. So we had to match that with our inspection processes in our engineering department and said, okay, what do we have to develop to get there? Handheld templates, as I mentioned earlier, Nate, we still have a hark to the past, right? We have some handheld templates. They're key because they give you that tangible look at things, especially when you're generating technical, or I should say, data that is not physically able to be touched, so to speak. It always leaves open room for interpretation of was that reading correctly? Is it measuring correctly? Is it scanning correctly? We get into that complexity. Handheld templates, there's really no argument. If it doesn't match, it doesn't match. But the speed at which we can process cars optically with these scanning systems, you'd never be able to do it with handheld. And the amount of surfaces that we scan the entire surface, the underbody and the top body. We have the whole thing. So it gives us immense amount of data, Nate, that we just otherwise wouldn't be able to ensure the parity that we get today if we were using outdated technology.
Yeah. And it's great to have you on, Brian, because you got this background in sports cars / IMSA and IndyCar. So you're well positioned, I think, to kind of answer this next question that I've heard for many years. Thankfully, I don't hear it as much anymore because I feel like this has been less of a narrative for NASCAR in recent years, which is good. But if you go back to the encumbered era of several years ago, there was all this talk about why does NASCAR have these inspection problems for teams? Problems, I know, a relative term here, but like, why do teams seem to get caught more often in NASCAR versus we don't hear that in open wheel or sports cars nearly as much? Can you shed any light on that with your background in all these series? Is there kind of a reason why that this is kind of like more of a storyline sometimes in NASCAR than it is in IndyCar or an open wheel car?
Yeah, pretty much the most direct way to say this is the culture of NASCAR for so many decades. You see it in all the things that are out there in social media and out there in in different outlets that people can get of great stories of guys that were pushing the boundaries and pushing things. When I was in IndyCar, there were certain things you would push on, but there was just not this immense desire to push every boundary. It was really about you set the car up, you got it to what you felt was its maximum within the rule book that it had, and then you would put it in the hands of that driver and let them go out there and excel and achieve things. The NASCAR sport, it's just the culture of the sport, really is what it is. And our culture it's changing, right? The processes, the rules that we have in place, it's changing because we can't allow cars, as you know, Mike, man, we and Nate, this as well. Our whole thing is we want to have the opportunity for anybody in that field to go out there and win on a given weekend. We just saw, I think a lot of that this year thus far. We've got a new winner, obviously, last week in the 21 car, and I think we'll probably see more of that. We see guys coming to the top 5 that haven't run in the top 5 before. I think it's great because, again, I looked at it this morning. I said, we must be doing something right when we've got all these opportunities coming for these guys that desire to get up there and show what their talent is, and now we're getting a chance to see them achieve that in these cars through our process, I think.
That's really interesting. So you look at that when there's a new winner, or kind of a surprise winner, you take a little bit of pride in that.
Absolutely. Derek Thomas, who does all of our, kind of our analysis of fan feedback and whatnot, he and I talk every week. I'm always interested in what do we get for the fan appreciation score. But I've said to him, how are we doing in qualifying? That's what I'm interested in, because how close are we keeping the cars, again, to give all these guys and the people working on the cars an opportunity to go out there and compete. They show up every weekend. They don't want to show up going, well, I know I haven't, I'll say, bent the rules as best as the other guys.
Yeah.
We want to try to keep it where they have a genuine shot to go out there and compete. So from my standpoint, yeah, I look at all that information because I think it's important. If we start losing the handle on that, it means we're not doing a good job at inspection. We're missing something. And I'd like to think that our people don't miss stuff because they try their absolute best week in, week out. And when you look at the size of the field, 36 to 40 cars, they show up with, on a roster, 6, 8, 10, 12 people, whatever the number is. We have a crew. Typically, we do our inspections for the NASCAR Cup Series with 22 people across all those stations. 22 people. Myself, our assistant director, and our series director. You got 25 people trying to watch this entire garage. Think about that. That's a lot going on with just that crew. But there's that relationship I talked about with the teams where they have respect for the NASCAR officials, the NASCAR leadership. They try to make sure that they don't do things that are going to upset us in a way where it's going to hurt them in the long run. So again, it is a give and take. It's a community of people that have to just work together week in, week out. So we appreciate that. They don't try to bend the rules like they did 30, 40, 50 years ago. Nate, kind of harking back to your question from earlier.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you understand. Well, they understand you have a job to do. You understand they have a job to do. You don't take it personally if they try to bend a rule because, like you said, it's the culture. So
exactly.
So I want to also just put a bow on the inspection process. You went through pre-race, well spoken, well documented. Now going to the post-race, and what's that inspection process like? I know we do a little bit of a mirror of the pre-race, different tolerances, and then we do some teardown. So what is it at the racetrack? Right.
So it's kind of a condensed version of what we did pre-race. We're still going to take all the cars. We're going to check them for weight. We're going to check that. We'll scan the underbody. We'll scan the overbody, if you will. We'll look at those things. We will do some post-race engine checks that are part of the process to make sure that there isn't an engine that's making more horsepower than it should effectively. And the way we check that is obviously to make sure it's not breathing more air, because that's how you make horsepower. One of the ways you can go about doing that. So we'll check that. We will also, at different times, we'll select different parts of the car to take off as part of our teardown inspection. We will, like this past weekend, we checked transmission, if you will, or transaxle as it's called, the drop gears, to make sure that matches what the NASCAR rule is or was. We'll actually take our shock inspection area and expand it out. We'll actually do disassembly of shocks on site to check to make sure that every piece and part and all the measurements of those are within the specifications of what we're looking for. So pre-race, we can't take things apart, right?
Right.
No time for it. And then as soon as we were to put a wrench on something or put any type of tool on it, we then own that. If we were to say, well, we're going to tighten this or we're going to check tightness, if we do that, now we own it. We can't do that. We have to trust our teams to do that and present the car so it's correct. So that's our opportunity to really dig in deeper, pull things off the car, look inside, look for things and say, yeah, okay, we have something here that we need to discuss, or no. And we'll tell them up front when we get done with an inspection. And if everything on that car looks really good and they haven't, I'll say pulled a fast one on us or done something, we will tell them, hey, you guys did a great job. And every time at the end of a race, when there is, everything's completed post-race, our series director will go around and he'll congratulate those guys one hand at a time. He'll shake everybody's hand and let them know you did a great job, and we appreciate what you do at your car week in, week out.
Do you tailor the inspection and what you look at by the racetrack? So a more aero-sensitive track, you look at one part of the car, a short track, a different part, a road course, a different part, or is it pretty standard across the board?
No, we'll shift some things around based upon the track configuration. It kind of helps us keep it kind of fresh. With you try to stay ahead of them.
Keep them guessing a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit of like where are they going, what are they looking at. But those guys know the rule book as well as we do, right? And that's the thing about it is we try to say, hey, look, we're just trying to keep you honest, keep you in check here. We're not trying to catch them out on things. We're just trying to make sure that they're staying in guidelines with the rules. So I think one of the things you want to talk about was the R&D teardowns that take place here. Maybe we talk about that. It's kind of a good segue for that. But yeah, at the track, it's limited because we have a limited amount of time. Obviously, the world needs to know, did so-and-so who won the race pass post-race tech? Or are we talking about somebody that needs to obviously be disqualified, and then we have talked about the second place and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think you were mentioning there the R&D center tech process, and this is something that's evolved over several seasons, and obviously when we made the switch to the next gen car, there was another layer to what that tech process will look like. But fans often really, one of the things that you see a lot, maybe on social media or references that you'll see them make at time to time is like, how can someone pass tech all week or race weekend and then they come to the R&D center and they don't? Now, we all at this table completely understand how that happens because visually we can see what those technical processes look like at the R&D center. Correct. But, and it is truly, they come in off of a hauler that is our hauler. We load those at the racetrack. One of our hauler drivers drives them home. They're unloaded at the R&D center. The teams show up and start that process. And when they leave with like
buckets of
parts and bolts. And I will never forget the first time we inspected a next gen car here at R&D, and I happened to peek out of the window and I was like, oh my.
What just happened?
So go ahead and fill the fans in on kind of what that process is and really why, you can find something on a Tuesday or a Wednesday that maybe you didn't see on a Friday.
Right. No, it's a great question, Amanda. And honestly, I touched on it a little bit before. We can't put tools on the cars and check things for, I'll say, correct tightness and or installation of things. Also, when these folks have spent the week building these cars, if you come to the track, for anybody that's never been to a NASCAR race, and I obviously would recommend everybody should, right? Come see these things up close. They are a work of art when they arrive. Outside in the driver's cockpit area, underneath, they're a work of art, and these guys and girls put every ounce of their, their blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak, into building these things. So we can't tear everything apart. We can't take anything apart, really, unless, there was some reason to, but that's not where we really want to go. So the opportunity to capture these cars right off the racetrack, right? Okay, you've raced it, and as Amanda mentioned, these things are going to come back in the NASCAR hauler that is going to secure them from the moment they left that racetrack. They go through our post-race inspection process. We get all the data, so our engineering department down here has information about what the body, the underbody, all the sensitive things. Comes back to this place here next door where we sit right now, and we've got the entire engineering group here that can then get involved, look at these cars as they get completely, I'll say, just torn down to the nuts and bolts, down to the pieces.
We're talking the wrap comes off,
it starts.
everything.
Yeah, it starts with photo documentation, right? Every angle of the car is documented with photos, and then the wrap literally starts to come off. And that's the things, we're not going to peel a wrap off at the track unless there's reason to, but we try to not screw up their, obviously their work they put an effort into, but the wrap comes off, and then we can start seeing underneath the skin. And then the entire skin, which is a carbon fiber flange fit body, that all comes off the car. We pull everything off, and we tear it right down to the chassis, the fabricated chassis pieces. The transaxle comes out, the fuel cell comes out. We look internal to the fuel cell, and times we will take engines out of cars and run them back to our dyno facility, and they'll go across there for evaluation. So as Amanda mentioned, everything, it goes from a car that you could run and drive if you could hop right in it to a bunch of parts laying on the floor. And we look at every single piece, and it's all laid out. It's all documented photographically so that we have the ability to go back and say, what did something look like 2 years ago on that part? What did it look like last year? What did it look like from that team versus this team? We look at all those things, and we make evaluations of, are we missing something at the track? Do we need to improve our process at the track? Are we good at the track, but we couldn't see this particular thing or this area? That allows us to get, in the weeds, so to speak, when we get here to the R&D center, which is great because, like I said, we have all the might of our engineering department plus our competition department. Our officials come in, they're involved in that process. And Amanda mentioned the teams are here. We don't do this in a vacuum. We don't do this just ourselves. We bring, the team is invited to come, 6 team members plus a crew chief and or team manager or both, to support the process, and they do. They come and support it. They want to come learn from us if we find something. They want to learn from us if we have guidance on things. So it's very much that same community aspect we talked about at the track, but at a more in-depth level, I guess I'll say. We're digging in further on the cars.
So you kind of answered it, but a popular question that we see all the time when, something like the 19 car fails R&D inspection, they passed inspection at the racetrack X amount of times. So, this happened in Daytona. There were, I think, probably 3 different inspection periods at Daytona. Correct. But yet they failed R&D inspection. So I guess part of it is, how is that possible? If you can explain that. And also, well, I guess there are things that we can, is it fair to say there are things that we can test in a kind of a calmer environment that is the inspection line, that where parts and pieces can change under race conditions that can't be measured by an OSS or an underbody scan or a template or whatever.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, that's a good question, Mike. Honestly, I mentioned before that we don't take cars apart when they come to us through the inspection process. It's not the way the inspection process is laid out. We have tools to measure various aspects of the car. We have a digital gauge that is calibrated, and it's measuring the spoiler angle of the car. For super speedway events, we add basically a dead weight mass to it to deflect the spoiler, and it has to be within a certain guideline of angular change from unloaded to loaded. And as long as it meets those requirements, we have no reason to take something apart on the car at that point. So when the fan says, well, why wouldn't you see that before? Well, first of all, it's I guess I'll step back to an earlier point in the process. When the car's in the chassis inspection area, which is their garage stall that we go car to car, and the hood and the deck lid are closed, that deck lid is not supposed to come back open for good reason. There's lots of things we don't want them, to go inside there. So once that's closed, we're not going to try to open that thing back up. And where I'm talking about measuring spoiler angle, that's at an area where the deck lid's already been closed and pinned shut, and we try to leave that alone. So there's things you can't see, and that's why we have the R&D process. That's the great catch-all, right? You bring a car back or bring multiple cars back here, and you're trying to understand where is the industry going, what are they working on, and sometimes you have things like that come up that appear to be, outside the rules, and we go through that process that took place on the 19 to to see where things are going to go.
And you mentioned earlier, I wanted to kind of, put a little bit of a conversation around, you mentioned like tolerances and how teams, they know what that is and they know kind of where they can push. But that is something that I think sometimes, fans may not fully understand. So we might be at a racetrack and maybe the third place has failed inspection, or the second place finisher failed inspection. And I don't want to get into any specific situation, but in general, like, a lot of times what happens is teams, we know what the tolerance is. So if you, maybe fell for, something in particular, we know that team is also being given like a certain amount of grace period because of the race, right? So like we look at and say, okay, in the race, this could have happened to this level. But a lot of times teams, I don't, mean this wrong, that they're going to use that tolerance that they have,
right,
because that's their job and that's what they do. But like, talk a little bit about like how, we do give them a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. We're just not going to give them a whole range of, just show up post race with whatever you have. There obviously has to be a rule there, but a lot of times if you fail for, some weights or something of that nature, vehicle weights or whatever that may be, most of the time there's a tolerance already built in there.
That's correct. We understand that when these cars go out on track, they go out there pristine. People see them on the pre-race grid and they go, wow, these things are beautiful. After the race, they're generally used up. They've driven them the way they need to drive them to try to obviously achieve what their ultimate goal, which is to win that race. So when they come back, we understand body damage. We understand the effects of that. The good thing about our scanning equipment, it allows us to, I'll say, justify an area that we see has been affected by contact with the track, or contact with another competitor, so we can, in our minds, go, okay, this wasn't done by the teams to get an advantage. This was done as a result of contact going on the track. And we are a contact sport, right? Indy cars try not to touch each other generally. Even your sports cars and your F1, they don't really want to touch each other because it screws up all the aerodynamic intricacies that they put into those cars. But our guys go out there and our girls go out there and they're gonna compete hard. They're gonna bang fenders, doors, bumpers, everything. They're gonna drive at Phoenix down the dog leg, drop down the bottom. It's gonna scrape the front splitter area, and that's going to have an effect on the race car, for sure. So the tolerance, if you will, that we have built-in tolerances for weight in the car. We understand that the car burns oil, it burns water, it collects tire rubber. Sometimes it loses or sheds body parts because of contact that took place on the track. As a result, the rules are set up to account for that, right? To make sure that it's fair for these competitors. We don't expect them to be perfect after the race because it's not possible. Again, there's so many things that happen out there that it's hard to say, well, that happened because you touched the wall here and you did that on purpose. That's not something we ever do. We try to make sure we account for that. In what our rules allow, if they go beyond that, and we said, look, we gave you all the things you had for tolerance in the post-race, and you go and step outside those boundaries, unfortunately, sometimes it happens, and they end up falling, to the disqualification category, and that's how it moves on.
Well, Brian, you talk about Josh Berry's win. Fox had a cool stat on the broadcast, more lead changes this year through 5 races than ever before. And I think you and your team really do honestly have a big role in that because, like you said, we're looking for an even playing field. And a fan can tune in on Fox, FS1, Prime, whatever it is that weekend, and know that every car has been scrutinized to the T and this isn't a level playing field and competitively balanced field, and that's what's great about NASCAR. So thank you for your time. Thank you for all the work you do each weekend. Gave above and beyond. This is probably the longest, most interesting inspection conversation that's ever been had. Might be the only one, but you nailed it. So thank you, Brian, so much. Appreciate you and appreciate all the time.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Mike, Amanda. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. We'll have to have you back maybe before the playoffs kick off.
Sounds good.
So moving on, I think we've covered everything from Las Vegas, but one quick note, the action on the track does not end with the checkered flag on Sunday. There is some action at Charlotte Motor Speedway right now. There is a Goodyear tire test, but 2 series are on track, the NASCAR Cup Series and the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And this is really another step in the direction of evolving the tire, softer tire, tire that wears out a little bit more. We feel like that is an area that is the special sauce, if you will, for good racing. And we've seen it. You look at, Phoenix, the best road course race of the next gen era, in Coda. I thought Bowman Gray was great racing, and all of that really had to do with softer tires. We got Martinsville coming up here in a couple weeks. The previous Martinsville race in the fall, the penultimate race of the season, had the softer tire, and I think that was the best Martinsville race. So this is kind of another step in that direction. And the teams participating, there's 3 in Xfinity and 3 in Cup. On the Xfinity side, the drivers are Sheldon Creed, Eric Almirola, and Austin Hill. And on the Cup side, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, and Chase Briscoe. So that is going on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. So should be a lot of content coming out of that too. We have 23 media there. We open it up to the media. So some driver availabilities at Charlotte Motor Speedway. So look for that content, NASCAR.com, and all your favorite NASCAR outlets out there.
All right. We are going to go ahead and hit our fan question for the week. A big thank you again for always sending in your questions and tagging us on those on X. We really appreciate it. This week's question comes from Johnny. Johnny asks, can you elaborate on the driver ambassador program? What led to NASCAR wanting to implement this, and what's the reward system for earning points, and is there a team in place that keeps track of what drivers do? So I'll give a quick overview on the driver ambassador program, and hopefully I'll touch on the questions here that Johnny had. So the driver ambassador program is new for 2025. You maybe have seen it referenced a little bit on social media, maybe in an article or two, but it is a program that was designed to help incentivize drivers when they spend their time promoting the sport. And that can look, a little or a couple different ways. It might be an appearance that they're making both at the track or off the track, depending on where it's at. Also could be, appearances that require travel, might always have a media element to them. You might see a driver walking a red carpet. Recently, I know you saw several drivers who made the trip to Mexico to help promote ticket sales, going on sale for the race there this summer. So just a different variation of opportunities for drivers. And the way that works is drivers earn points when they participate in activities, and those activities are organized, and drivers essentially receive a request. They can say yes or no to that request. If they say yes to that request, they have to fulfill the request. And ultimately, once they do so, then they earn the allotted points for that. Drivers are essentially, there is a leaderboard that I don't have access to that, so I will be honest, this program is ran by kind of our driver services and industry teams, and so we are familiar with it. We can make driver requests through it, but it's not a program that I have access to the insider, vantage point, so to speak.
But the drivers do.
Which
is pretty cool, because I think regardless of how much bonus they can get,
yeah,
I almost feel like they don't even care about that part.
No,
they just want to beat.
Yeah,
continue beating. Once the race is over, they would just want to keep.
Yeah,
they want. Yeah, they're so competitive that we could be, awarding cans of Coke and they'd be just as into it.
Yeah. So ultimately, it is. You are essentially kind of, the program is. For example, if you are, it's based on your points running or your running points from last year or where you finish. It's also based on your social media reach and what your following is. I think there's also an element if you're a champion, whether it be the current champion or former champion, that comes into play there. So there's a couple things that go into kind of, the opportunities and the things that drivers can do. But I can just say personally from my experience, and I know it's only March, so we have a couple months under our belt, is it has been exciting to see drivers out and about and wanting to do things and generally wanting to do the opportunities and promote the sport. And we've had drivers in, so many cities and doing things that, are going to be great for NASCAR. And I look forward to seeing kind of where this is at, toward the end of the year. And maybe as we get a little bit more into the season, we'll have someone come on and talk a little bit more in depth about the program. But I just wanted to give Johnny to answer his question and give a quick overview. But like Forde said, the leaderboard is definitely something that I'm sure is fun to watch. He did ask specifically if someone is there to track what drivers do. And yes, there is a team that does that. They also try to play very close attention to make sure someone's not also gaming that system and using it to their advantage. So there's a couple things in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But honestly, true shout out to Rob McKinney and Justin Swilling and Jen Knoble and several others that I'm going to miss in saying their names, but so many people took credit for the success and the start of that driver ambassador program, because it's been really fun to see it take place.
Well, it's fun to see the results. I mean, Johnny asked, what led to NASCAR wanting to implement this. The driver's time is at such a premium, but we need to grow the sport, and the biggest stars and the biggest microphones are the drivers. I feel like, you look at the ratings that just dropped today, 3.1 million viewers for Las Vegas on Sunday, which was the highest cable race since 2021. You got to believe that the promotion that these drivers are doing, largely because of this program, is working and helping.
Yeah.
So that's the goal of the program, is just putting NASCAR front and center more often and in bigger outlets.
And incentivizing them for the time, because like you say,
Exactly.
we have a long season. It's not lost on us that, it's a lot of time and effort. And so we appreciate them being willing to partner with us on this program. And like you said, hopefully, we know it's working because we can see it. But yeah, so Johnny, thank you so much for your question. Like I said, maybe later on in the season, we'll have someone hop on and we can talk a little bit more in depth, and maybe just even about some of the things the drivers have had a chance to do. And we can talk a little bit about what that is. It is worth noting, though, that if it happens at the track, like when you see post-race interviews, you see drivers in the media center, a lot of those normal at-track, traditional opportunities, those are opportunities they're doing because they're a race car driver and
Right.
They're wearing a fire suit, and that those are requirements that also fall under kind of another agreement we have with them. So this is really for stuff that's kind of above that.
Yes. Yeah. So if they're in the media center with media coercing them to say bad things, like Amanda would say, that's different. That's an obligation per the rule book. This is a little different.
Oh, all right. And that point, we're going to wrap this episode before I'm roasted even more by Mike Forde and even Nate Ryan. So, thank you guys for listening. As always, we are so appreciative of the feedback, whether it's about me or not. We appreciate your time. As we always say, please rate and review the podcast and keep those questions coming in.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.